Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Industrial Real Estate Show. I am very pleased to be talking about property management today, which is a topic that doesn't get covered a whole lot. And I think people think that they have a general understanding of it, but probably don't know too much of the details that go into it. So please be joined by Charlie Stanton, who is with Valley Advisory and Management, property management firm that does property management in both Arizona and Texas. They've got a 1.5 million square feet under management, including office, retail, and industrial. Charlie, thanks so much for joining me on the show. I'm very excited for this one.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's a great topic because it's so important. Property management is so important, but I think a lot of people just assume that it's very simple and very basic. And I think that there's a lot more that goes into it. And I think that there's a lot that separates a good property management from a bad property management company. So from your standpoint, if we could just start real at the basics, how do you describe property management?
Yeah, property management is really the net that catches everything going on at the property for the landlord. So full property management includes both maintaining the property, being the property manager and doing the full accounting for the property, collecting the rents, paying the expenses to the vendors. So the property manager is the catch-all. Everything that's going on, if there's leasing problems, we help solve that. If there's maintenance problems, we help solve that. If there's landlord financing issues, we try to help solve that. And so property managers end up having a very crucial role in the performance of a property because we're trying to make sure tenants are following their leases that they should be. The covenants are very important when it comes to a lease and making sure, especially in industrial, making sure tenants are doing their permitted use. Also, they're following their lease, maintaining what they should be maintaining on the property. So, those are important areas for the tenant side that we get involved in. At the property side, we really dig in and have to maintain the total, really the risk of the common areas of the property. If there's potholes, if there's issues, if there's a damaged fence, if there's whatever's happening to the property, if there's roof issues. Industrial especially, it's not uncommon to have a truck drive through a wall or a dump truck to take out a fence because of where a trash can's positioned. So we act as not only collecting rents or just maintaining, but we have a risk profile that we manage as well for the landlord. And so I think that gets a little missed is that sometimes the performance of a property can be down to the manager because sometimes if managers are not responsive or effective, that means tenants don't want to stay there and they want to move. And that makes them, obviously that impacts cash flow if tenants are leaving. So property managers have a lot of influence at a property from time to time. A good manager is responsive. For my team, I really try to give them, not overburden them with property management. That's sort of how the industry works. Is you get a manager, you load them up on properties, and they're really just kind of putting out fires. Our team is really dedicated to of being able to spend time at the property, go to the property, be there, handle issues with a tenant, investigate issues that are going on, try to meet with multiple vendors if there's some sort of solution that needs to be made. So I think from what you can kind of find from a good manager, people who care about the property, who have systems in place to help manage the property and really just dedicate time to what's going on and also just reviewing everything, having good systems in place, like in terms of just managing the leases. I mean, that's something that just can get complicated and training the management on those type of issues. Sometimes I've talked to managers in terms of hiring and they just don't really even, no one's ever really taught them how to read a lease, but then they're the ones who are really in charge of enforcing that lease. So there's a lot of property manager. There's just a lot of aspects that are really important that a manager has to know financially. They have to know the mechanics of a property. They have to know the leases. So they get into a legal area that they have to understand. They get into a maintenance area that they need to know plumbing, electrical, all that. And then on on the revenue side or on the finance side, they've got to understand revenues and accounting and CAMREX if your property has common areas that you're maintaining, so, and then billing back to tenants. So there's from a property management side, there's actually a lot property managers end up doing. It's a pretty sophisticated job, which I think that's probably one thing that people miss most out of property management.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And it's funny because there's the full spectrum of property managers. I was in a meeting with a property manager a few weeks ago, and she was probably in her 70s, looked like she was in her hundreds, probably the toll of being in property management for that long.
Right. Yeah.
And she was her system. I don't know if there were any systems. It was a ledger that she had on her desk to keep track of rent and revenue, and at a notepad for issues that came in. And that was about it. I couldn't tell if there was any software she was incorporating. It looked to be as old school. It looked to be like a property management company from the 60s. How have you seen the industry evolve? And there's a few things we could discuss in there because it'd be really interesting to get your thoughts on what a property manager should be incorporating, but how have you seen the industry evolve over the last 10, 20 years?
Yeah. So I've been in this industry for about 10 years now. What I've seen it evolve from is, um, a lot of people I've taken over properties from like the old school manager that you're talking about. It's like they use Excel and maybe a cell phone, and then they have a bookkeeper that does some bookkeeping, and nothing's really known. Everything's sort of in the mind of the property manager that's been on the property, and nothing's really well documented. There's been I don't know if there's a software called Yardi that's out there. That's a really sophisticated software, and it's in a very elaborate software, and they keep adding on different features to it. But any good manager is going to adopt a software like Yardi or MRI or any one of those softwares, because not only do they manage the leases, they manage all the accounting, and then they can manage just facilities type information, workflow, work orders if you're in a building that has work order processes. So I think from anyone in property management, there's just been a huge shift to everybody being on some sort of sophisticated software to run the business. And it really helps everything because everything can be tracked. One of the biggest issues I found is just the institutional knowledge that gets left. You have a manager who retires, or you transition a manager, and they know that that leaky faucet in the back always leaks when it rains or something like that. Some weird thing that happens, but only they know, and that doesn't get documented anywhere. Sometimes not taken care of, but they're using software, having places where you can document that stuff that anyone can see. That's been something that's really important, I think, to the industry. And anyone, if you're ever looking for a manager, I would really ask like what kind of softwares you use, because that's how you know you're going to get a good manager overseeing your property. Because there are, it was for a long time, for decades. One of my managers has been at it for 40 years, and for a long time it was ledgers, and you kept a lot of important memos or documents as best you can. Everything was handwritten, but it's really evolved now, fortunately, to technology, and there's some really good technologies out there.
Is there anything else that people should be looking at when they're perhaps interviewing different property managers? Yes, you mentioned the software that they're using. How else can you distinguish between a good one and a bad one?
Right. Yeah. I think one of the biggest takeaways is asking them the workload that they have. How many properties are these managers going to manage, and what kind? Some firms they may have an industrial team, a retail team, an office team. So if you have an industrial property, obviously you'd want to make sure they have an industrial team managing it. But you also want to ask, how are they, what's the workload like? What's any redundancies that they have? Is it a property manager with an assistant property manager? Just so if something happens to that property manager, there's a backup there who's familiar with your property. And also ask the tenure of your staff, because that there's a lot of turnover in property management. It's a tough job. You deal with a lot of stuff. You deal with a lot of headaches day to day. And so there just gets burnout. Sometimes people just want to change in properties that they're overseeing. Some people just leave the field. And so asking them how long your manager's been around, how long have they been managing properties, that'll really help narrow down what you want to do. Because if you can find somebody who has a staff that's been there a while, and a staff that isn't overloaded with properties, then they're going to give you a much better service for your property. Because at the end of the day, that's really important, because there's so many things that can go wrong, and if people aren't paying attention, tenants invariably are going to be doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing. So I would say, yeah, again, just to summarize it, yeah, technology, see what kind of technology they have. Preferably one of the sort of the top softwares like MRI or Yardi. The time they've been working there, and then just sort of their workload.
Is speaking specifically for industrial, is there a magic number that an average property manager can handle without feeling overwhelmed or dropping the ball on things?
That's a great question. Yeah, industrial is one of the asset classes where managers can handle a lot more properties because there's just generally less happening at the properties. Retail is basically open 24/7. There's a lot of pressure from on the property from just consumers and all sorts of other activities happening. I would say with industrial, yeah, they can. Some can be a team, maybe two people could be managing 25, 30 properties. But I think, and that's a lot. Some of it will depend on the square footage, the size, the proximity of where they're located. I mean, if you're an owner and you want your manager out at your property inspecting it once a month, maybe it's like they can handle 20 properties or 25 properties. But that would probably be in that range, 20 to 30 properties. I mean, I've met some managers who is like one person who had like 35 properties, and there's just no way you can get anything done between Camrex and just monthly ongoing happening at the properties. It's too hard. I mean, even if you just do the math of driving to all your properties, you'd be spending 25 hours a week in the car just driving around if that's what, if you're really doing a good job. Because I really push for my managers and with the owners we work with that we want to be out at the properties at least once a month, if not more, just to be checking on and meeting with tenants, meeting with vendors if we need to, because it's key to really just see the property and know what's going on. A lot of property managers you meet and they've maybe been to the property like once or twice in a year. So I would really, you have to kind of define that scope with the owner. Some owners just say, "Hey, I don't really need you to go a lot. I'm comfortable." But that's one thing that is really key, I think, to really be hands on with the property.
Yeah, great point. On that topic, then, how do fees work? Because and maybe you could give me like an industry average. Like I would always associate as just a percentage of the rent coming in as management fees. But is there a scale based on how much work is expected? Because you mentioned one property manager might go once a year, one property manager might go once a month. So there's a sliding scale of work that can be done. How do the fees work? How could you describe that?
Yeah, totally. So they're generally, I would say the general fees run between 4 and 6% of gross receipts that are collected. And now there may be some revenue items that are excluded if there's like a landlord financing, security deposits aren't considered revenue. So there's certain things that get obviously removed or are not made sure they're not included. But it's usually 4 to 6% of gross revenue, and that would cover the full property management, probably like monthly inspections, and that would cover also the full accounting, revenue and expenses and tracking it. It might go a little higher. If the accounting burden's kind of higher, if the property is part of a fund and there's accrual-based accounting that needs to be done, might be a higher fee. If it's maybe just a cash base on a tax basis, that could lower the fee in terms of the accounting. It's a pretty clean way to do it where you can charge 4 to 6. And then I've seen different managers maybe bill back certain things that they maybe have to pay for to the property. But that's sort of property manager dependent, especially if there's like SNDAs, if you're going through a transaction with the property or refinancing, there might be some additional fees added on there. So generally 4 to 6% is what you see from property management companies, at least here in Arizona. And I think that's cleanest. Now, then you're right. There's different arrangements that get made, and depending on the scope of what the landlord wants to do, some properties are a little bit cash constrained. So the landlords maybe I've one landlord I talked to a couple weeks ago. He's really involved with the property, so the property management he wants is really just to kind of do some oversight for him, and that more is just on a fixed fee basis, and that's just dependent on what that manager or that owner kind of is willing to pay. We've also do some maintenance management only at properties, which means we just handle the maintenance side. We don't really deal with the accounting side of it. It's a group out of California, so they have their own kind of team in California, but they need somebody with boots on the ground here. That's kind of a fixed fee, just negotiated on time and what we're offering them. Because if they want 20, property management, we try to give 24/7 service to the landlord, so we try to factor that into the fee. But generally, a 4 to 6 is accommodating for everyone.
Yeah, thanks for detailing that. I think that's very
Yeah.
insightful. David has a question as well, which I'll get to in one second, but I just wanted to summarize from my standpoint, just to make sure I'm on the right page. So property management really can be that full spectrum of somebody that just wants to have a maintenance contract in place versus a full suite of property management, including the accounting and dealing with all the tenants on there. So that it really could be a sliding scale depending on what they want. And I think that that's an important part to emphasize because there's probably a lot of owners, probably even on this call right now, that own their own properties and say, well, I want to be hands-on, I want to do a lot of this, but at the same time, they probably don't have the right connections or the right amount of time to even be able to handle doing a renovation or dealing with the ongoing maintenance.
Mhm.
So is it what do you find more often? Do you find someone wants the whole suite or do you find that it's piecemeal here and there?
I think you find people who mostly want the full suite, but you do, I would say that's 90% of it, but you do get the people who are hands-on to some varying degree that want to be a part of managing it. And so yeah, but it's an interesting field because you just the buyers out there, the buyer universe of real estate is really diverse when you kind of look at it. You get the local kind of mom and pop group who maybe own some properties and they need help, they don't know. Then you get these really sophisticated groups who know what they're doing, but they want like, hey, we don't know any vendors in Arizona, we don't know sort of the nuances of your laws down there, so we need somebody who's got that expertise to handle that. And so you really do see a spectrum of it, but I'd say most people really want the full service of it.
Hmm. Yeah, well said. So David asks, Charles, can you define the difference between property management and asset management?
Yeah, great question. So property management is the we handle the day-to-day operations of the property. Again, and we'll also do the accounting, but we're going to handle uh, maintenance issues, the managing the common areas, asset management, and we don't do asset management, but asset management is generally higher up where it's more on the owner level side, where they're maybe looking at a broader portfolio of properties and they're communicating with the property managers and maybe acting as sometimes a liaison between the owner to drive the full economics of the property. So they may be working on leasing, they're working on larger issues at the property. The property manager might say, "Hey, you need a new paint job." The asset manager might say, "Well, they might have a better, fuller picture of what the economics and what kind of returns investors want, and then make those decisions to say um, actually, we're going to defer that paint job till next year, that type of thing." So, in my work, usually the asset manager is overseeing the entire property in terms of leasing. Property managers, again, on the commercial side, generally don't get into leasing. We may do renewals, but any sort of like new tenant leasing, that's always going to be done by usually. Now, a property manager or a brokerage shop may have property management, but usually a broker who is um, in that field will be doing the actual leasing. Like, retail broker will be doing the retail leasing, or industrial broker doing the industrial brokerage, or broker or leasing. So, generally for the property manager, again, we're just boots on the ground. The asset manager is probably dictating the entire property and what they want to do leasing, what they want to do spending wise, what they want the property manager to focus on. So hopefully that answers it for you.
Yep, he said thanks, good info.
Yeah,
And I
thanks.
anything else you wanted to ask on that, David?
No, it just seemed what you were describing, Charles, a minute ago, sort of the accounting you were given. I was just wondering if that was sort of bleeding into asset management. I mean,
Oh
uh,
yeah, yeah, and some of that accounting goes up to a more general accounting fund that they
yeah,
have. So generally, what we've dealt with is we do the property specific accounting, and then yeah, that will go
okay,
up to a fund where they're looking at their own numbers, or that rolls into bigger numbers.
oh, that's good
Um,
info.
yeah.
So I know that you've got 24/7 hotline if people have requests, and I could certainly appreciate that retail would be more taking advantage of that versus an industrial company which might close at 6 o'clock at night and might not have anyone there on the weekends. What do you find industrial calls or issues come up? Do you find this usually in the business hours, or do you come across instances where it is after hours?
Um, yeah, generally, so in Arizona, roof leaks are a big problem. And we have what's called evap coolers, which have condensate lines which leak water. The evap coolers are on the roof. Those leak water. They have a condensation component to them that leaks sometimes onto the roof. So those are generally so in industrial, just in general, you don't get a lot of calls after hours. It is usually during business hours again because they're most tenants are usually going to be responsible for most of the contents of their building, either mostly inside, even probably some level of the exterior. And then the general common areas are usually maybe some landscaping, very minimal, and it's going to be some roadways. So if there's like a pothole forming, usually that's going to be known pretty soon. So no, I would say on the industrial side, it's an asset class where you don't really get a lot of calls. It may be something where it's like a roof, like when you get a bad storm or a tree got torn down. Usually, it's something that it's a pretty easy to respond to. We manage office, we manage industrial. That's the stuff where people are there at all odd hours of the day, and you do get those just calls in the middle of the night or a fire alarm's going off. So like in industrial, typically the tenants will have like their own fire alarm system and they'll be the ones responsible for it. So if there is some sort of fire issue, the tenant would be the first one notified, fortunately, and not the landlord. Um, and so I would say of all the management too, just to say this, the industrial is probably, I think, the best to manage. It's my favorite asset class because you usually get some really good tenants in there, and they're usually going to be responsible for a lot of the building. So from a management side point and just a landlord standpoint, you're not there's a lot less you're going to have to be involved with at the property, at least on the day-to-day operations. Not that, you still want to do inspections and check everything out, but the tenants will usually be responsible for a lot of things, especially those late night calls.
Yeah. What else is common? Roof leaks, you said, is a common issue that comes up. Have you documented or just kept mental track of common things that always seem to pop up in industrial buildings?
Yeah, for industrial, that's a good question. A lot of times, industrial, you get a lot of dumping, especially because if we have properties that they're not locked up or anything. There's no gate system there. And there's trash bins out there. And it's not uncommon to see crates. Your tenants may be having crates that they put out that they're going to have a company come pick up. So it's not uncommon to see a lot of trash happening at the property. So one of the big issues that we have at industrial is that, and they're closed on the weekends. So people think, oh, hey, there's a big dumpster and it's closed on the weekends. No one's going to see me. So let me go drop off mattresses, a couch, or park a car that we're going to abandon. I mean, we showed up to a property once and one of our properties, and there was a giant truck trailer just sitting there. And we had to call a tow company, and that was hard because they don't really want to tow that, and it was a challenge to get out of there. So you get weird dumping happening sometimes at industrial properties from time to time. Roof leaks are a big issue for us in Arizona. Again, just because we have a lot of like with the either evap or HVAC units are up there with condensate lines. Evap coolers have a water line going to them, so those will leak a lot. So though we'll come across that, and then a lot of it sometimes will be landscaping, and you just have irrigation issues. Like we had an irrigation line that ran under asphalt that started leaking, and it just started creating a whole bunch of asphalt issues for us. So we had to tear out asphalt. So all of a sudden, a small little irrigation leak cost $7,000 to repair. So I would say those are kind of the extent of the issues that we see from time to time. And then you also just get into where tenants are maybe doing things they shouldn't be doing, parking a bunch of vehicles there, or hosting some event on a weekend all of a sudden that they never got landlord approval from. They didn't think they needed to. So you just get you get kind of odd stuff like that. But for the most part, industrial is pretty quiet, or at least from our experience. It's the tenants are very respectful, and most of them are just trying to get their job done and get the work done and keep a clean area. We do have a area with like car mechanics there, and one of the issues we have is environmental, where they start dumping like oil down drains and stuff. And we had one dump one down a like kind of a basically like a sewer drain, and that's a huge issue because then the government has to get involved And it requires a lot of remediation. When tenants move out too, that's kind of an issue because they start, if some tenants, like we had to kick out a tenant once on like a yard, like a lot, and he just left a bunch of barrels, that had, we didn't know what was in them. I think it turned out to be some acid, but they were giant drums. So, you do get some people leaving stuff. So you can get, dumping, you can get just weird chemicals at properties sometimes. I mean, that doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen from time to time.
Yeah, when you're managing 1.5 million square feet, you get a lot of good tenants, I'm sure, but there's inevitable that you're going to have some bad tenants at that size.
Yeah.
So I can appreciate that. I want to go back to the monthly walkthrough that you would do on a property and just get some more insight on what you're looking for when you do those. Is it just a checklist that you take and you check off everything, or is it a visual inspection? What are you doing on those monthly ones?
Yeah, so it's we don't actually have any. We used to have formal checklists. We got rid of that, and it's we use a photo app that we take photos, and that photo app has categories that we like to cover: landscaping. So I guess it's a checklist in a way, but it's landscaping, it's asphalt, it's roof, it's paint, it's the side of the building. It's certain areas that maybe the manager knows of, but what we look for is we try it's a visual inspection. It's driving out there, it's telling the managers get out of your car, walk around the property, go in, see if you can talk to tenants, visit with them. We don't always try to bombard the tenants all the time, but maybe every few months make sure you hit a couple tenants, so throughout the year you've seen them, and checking their spaces. But when you're for the exterior, the first thing is you're looking at the roads, making sure there's no potholes. Those you want to get taken care of as soon as possible. That's one of the bigger risks because people love to accidentally trip or damage their car on a pothole. You don't know if they damaged their car on that pothole or not, but all of a sudden, you get an email or a call that they did. So those are that's an easy risk mitigation is checking those areas out, checking fencing if you have that, make sure there's no holes in it. Then looking at the buildings, looking at the land, is the landscaper taking care of what they need to be doing? Is the building looking good? Do you see any water leaks anywhere on the landscaping by the backflows? Then looking at the paint, is there any just sort of issues going on with that? Is the flashing along the roof damaged or anything that you can see? Most of my managers, I don't have them get up on the roof. We'll usually bring in another vendor or a contractor or a roofing vendor to go out there and look at that, just for safety and security issues. But generally, it is just walking around and just seeing if you notice anything. And what we do is really document. I would recommend anybody just document as many photos as you can, because invariably you'll get some issue where they say, "Oh, this problem's been going on for months," and then you can go back through your photos and see, "Hey, has that been going on?" No, this area looked fine, but we try to just really take photos of the entire property every time we go out, and we do look for some key areas of it. As well. And then, yeah, when you're going into the tenant suite, I mean, we don't, especially in industrial, they can be dirty, they can be a little gross at times. So, it's not, the tenants are supposed to keep them clean, but for that, we're really kind of making sure, is there any damage inside the suite that we aren't noticing? Have they all of a sudden like moved stuff around? Have they added stuff? Sometimes we've had tenants where they just start adding power, and they didn't let the landlord know, or they're moving like a sink around, or they're like, hey, we tore down this wall. So, you're looking for just sort of major, are they damaging the property, right? That's what you're kind of checking out, or have they done anything to the property that the landlord wouldn't be happy with, or that is not in accordance with the lease?
It's a great point because I had this conversation with someone the other day about the differences between industrial and residential. And one of the things that I brought up was that in residential, you'll never have tenants spend money on their space, right? Like maybe you get them, maybe they paint a wall, but that's it. They're not replacing toilets. They're not adding a new fridge. Like they're going in there, they're taking it exactly as it is, and they're going to move out and it's going to be the exact same. On industrial, you could have tenants spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. If it's a big operation, they might spend $1 million plus just right into the building, and that cowboy mentality of a lot of them do it without even thinking they need permission. So that's
Yeah.
a great point, is to you don't know if you let a tenant go in there for a while and they just don't even think that they needed permission for it, and all of a sudden they made some significant changes to the building. That can be a huge issue.
Yeah. I mean, we've walked in on tenants where they're doing work and they're like, oh, I didn't know I need, unfortunately at that time it wasn't a lot of work, but they're like, oh, I didn't know I need to get the landlord's permission, because one person signs the lease. Might be an owner that's in, New York or something. And then they have this whole operation here in Arizona. And the person who's running the operations here has no idea what the owner signed to in the lease. And that's a common issue where you have one person operating a location but has no awareness of what actually the lease requires. And yeah, so you just run into that a lot where it's like, yeah, we moved this wall around, we added this, we tore this down, and you're like, well, this is a problem. And, a lot of times I will say to the benefit of an owner, a lot of times they're improvements. But what gets scary is when they start messing with plumbing and electrical, where it's like, we need to get an inspector in here, to sign off on this because we have no idea, if you did this to code at all, and get somebody involved here who knows what they're doing, and double check your work, because I don't know if this is going to just light up in a fire, in 2 days, because you had some shoddy guy do the work. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's two that come to mind that I see as issues regularly. I shouldn't say regularly, but I have seen them. And you're right, most improvements or work that's done does add some value to the building. If at the very least it adds value to the tenant, which keeps the tenant happy. So most landlords would agree to it, and they'll have language in their lease that says you can't do anything unless you have the prior written approval of the landlord. They can't unreasonably withhold it. So usually it's not an issue. But two times that I do see it come up is when they start removing things. So there might be office space that they just want to turn into shop space. So they go and demo a 1,000 square feet worth of office. Well, now that was a real improvement for the space. It'd be expensive to add that back in. And then the other
Yeah.
one, which especially in small tenants, is they add mezzanine space, and it's done with pizza and beer and a few of their friends, and it's not to code. It's the most janky construction you can imagine, and then there's all sorts of issues there, like what happens if there was an injury, or what happens if that caused damage and it fell, or God forbid someone got hurt. So those are the two that come to mind that are issues. And how would you know that if you're not going to the property regularly?
Yeah. I mean, it's why the inspections are really, really important. And I think if people aren't doing them, the tenants, whether they mean to or not, they just do stuff that, you got to just be careful, and you got to be watching them, because they'll try to do improvements. We had one tenant who's just trying to paint the building because he didn't like the color, but it was part of a longer shop center. We're like, well, you can't paint just your building, but he had guys ready to go. We're like, no, no, like the landlord likes the paint color. Just because you don't doesn't mean you could just do what you want to do. So, it's just, I will say too, the one kind of parasites on properties can be like the phone service companies. Like we have Cox Communication here, and they try to weasel their way into all the different buildings to try to set up their system. So if like a new tenant moves in, they can be there, or they start like just digging through trying to dig through your property to set up like more cable lines. So that's an issue. It's not like a horribly huge issue, but that's an issue we've run across where all of a sudden they show up and they're like, oh yeah, we're here to just trench through your parking lot real quick. We'll fix it all. It's okay. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You need we need to have an agreement set up, and they're like, oh, we have some old agreement with you. And it's like, that was for something entirely different, So that's one that they've gotten better lately, but we've had that where all of a sudden they're just on property doing stuff. So, again, another reason why to have good inspections, also just have good communication with your tenants, so they call you when something's weird at the property, and they know who you are as the property manager. They know who you are to call you to say, hey, there's a giant truck here digging a hole. Is that right? And you say, no, I'll be right out there.
Yeah, I know a number of scenarios where tenants don't even know who their property manager is. So they might call the leasing broker that has a sign on the property because they just assume that that's who it is, because the
Yeah.
property manager makes zero effort to actually go and do that. Are you, so you, part of your site visit, you're talking to the tenants once a month? Is that sort of the interval that you're aiming for?
Yeah, we'll try to talk to them. I wouldn't know if it necessarily once a month, but it's you want to at least talk to them a few times a year. And so we don't always necessarily want to bombard them. Sometimes we'll try to go into their you know, if you're on site and they've got like their bay door open, you know, yeah, jump in, just say hi to them. You know, sometimes the again, the tenant who they may just have the workers there, you know, some guys like working on something, so we won't really bother them because they don't know who we are. We don't really know who they are. But if there's like a manager of like a location or something, we'll try to check in with them. But yeah, I mean, at least every 3 months, I would say you want to check in with your tenants as best you can. But you know, again, in property management, there's still a lot of communication with tenants in terms of all the other info. Like, you know, they have to maintain their HVAC units, or we always have to get you know, reports from them. Hey, was your vendor out there? Can you send us the invoice from that? Can you send us your service contract? So there's usually regular communication going on outside of just inspections. Hopefully, industrial, yeah, it's probably gonna be less. And but yeah, it's really important to just try to meet with them as regularly as you can. It is good, and building that rapport is important.
Yeah, yeah, great point. Shifting to the risk side. So let's say that there is a pothole in the property and someone's driving their car and it causes some damage to their car and they decide to sue the owner. So they're probably suing property management as well, I'm guessing.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. So fortunately, it doesn't usually go to litigation that quickly. It's insurance. Hey, I had this issue. I'm contacting you. I'm getting my insurance involved. We'll then dump it over. But yeah, it is using both. We'll start with the landlord's insurance on that, but then yeah, it will get involved with us. Fortunately, so our rule of thumb is if there's a pothole, you know, take care of it within 24 hours, right? No, regardless of the cost, because those are huge risks, very easy to litigate risks at a property. You know, somebody just steps in it, trips, and they fall, and you have, because a lot of our properties we don't have cameras there. You know, landlords that don't necessarily want to invest in a big camera security system, so we don't have eyes 24/7 on the property, so we don't know if any of this is true or not. You know, they just take a photo, they got and send those to us. So it's usually going through insurance. And those, yeah, a lot of times then the insurance companies start fighting and they may come after us if they think it's, you know, the property management company, if they think it's our problem for not maintaining it. Like we have one right now that happened to our property in Texas. The guy had a brand new 2025 Hyundai Genesis, drove through one of our potholes, damaged his car, and he's been trying to come after us. Well, we had to really do some investigative work, and we found the spot where that pothole was actually not on our property, but an easement that we're
Mm.
associated with, but we don't actually own it. But he, you know, we have no idea if that actually happened or not. So, you know, he maybe, we have no idea if those pictures are even real. You know, we're not going to necessarily go out there, meet him and talk to him. You know, that just gets to, that creates a whole nother challenge. So generally we'll go to insurance and they'll fight. I have not, let's just put it this way. I have not participated in anything that far along to warrant litigation. It's usually insurance. We did have a lady who tripped and fell at a retail property of ours, and Sprouts is the tenant, and they have cameras set up, and we got to see it, and it was a pretty sad act. I mean, she broke her hand, and
Mm.
she got beat up, and it was really sad. But she tripped over a speed bump, but it was a marked speed bump that we had. I mean, it's painted really bright yellow and everything. So she tried coming after us, but the insurance denied it because she didn't. You know, there was just we weren't at fault. There was nothing negligent that we did that warranted the accident. But people will constantly come after us for everything. So fortunately, I will say it doesn't for us in our experience it hasn't gone to litigation. It just becomes more of an insurance battle. But that doesn't mean it won't go to litigation if people feel like they're, you know, damaged enough.
Is it just something that you have to come to expect being in the industry that there's always because I'm guessing most of the phone calls that you get are a problem. You're not getting
Mhm.
a tenant calling you and saying, "Hey, Thanks so much for that great inspection you did on the property the other
Right.
day. That was fantastic. And most calls are probably a problem. Is that just something you have to come to expect, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, that and that's that's what I was talking about, the referencing the burnout earlier for managers, because it is. Yeah, nobody calls you, say, hey, we're going to give you an extra $1,000 this month. You guys have been wonderful. It's always, here's a problem. Your incoming calls are always a problem, and your outgoing calls are usually you having to go deal with a problem. So that's just one of the issues that we do, and we, with the managers, you try to work with them to kind of work through some of these problems, and understand it's not personal. But yeah, it's day in and day out. It's just you're dealing with. You're sort of the call center for every problem that's going to happen at the property. And people do, they love to get especially the problems usually, what's funny too is when tenants are up for lease renewal, that's when you start hearing a lot of the problems. Hey, I really want to stay here, but you guys have been awful. The landlord's been awful. This property is terrible. It's never been nice since I moved in, but can I sign a 5-year lease with five-year options? You go, okay, yeah, okay. You must really hate it here.
It's so funny you say that because when I if I'm touring someone through a building and they're like, oh yeah, no, everything looks good, this is great, I almost just assume that it's low on their list. But if they start pointing out things that are a problem, I'm like, they like this
Oh
space.
yeah.
So yeah, that's the human tendency. Mark has a question. Any wild stories you can share that stand out from your 10 years in the business?
Um, Man, there are well, I'll say this is a lesson. Here's a lesson. The most dangerous type of real estate is a vacant property. And because you just get transients, one, your insurance costs go up. Two, you got to actually almost do more oversight. You probably got to be out there weekly because you just don't know what's going on. This is a pretty down and dirty industrial building we have, and it's a property that eventually will just be torn down and turned into an apartment once the city starts getting towards it. It's a great property in a great location, but it's an old industrial area. And so we had a less than stellar, the landlord agreed to this, but we had a less than stellar um, contractor go in and just do some, like, changed out a water heater, cleaned out some fridge, reconfigured some shelving, and put some paint on it, just some kind of basic stuff, at least we thought. Well, I show up to the property to do like a weekly inspection, and there's a foot and a half of water just sitting all throughout the building. It's 1,000 square foot building. Well, the water heater the guy installed, burst, unfortunately, and it took a week. And after a week of just water consistently running, we had that. Fortunately, the remediation wasn't too bad. We were able to soak it all up, get some fans in there. We didn't really have to cut out any wood. We're in Arizona. It was the middle of the summer, so you open some doors and things dry out pretty quickly. So that happened. I will say, I don't know if I have any like other truly wild stories. I maybe I have to start jogging my memory a little bit, but industrial at that same area, we've gotten dead bodies there before. Sadly,
Oh,
it's like just homeless people, transients, so it's nothing that the landlord did or nothing that a tenant did. We had that. I mean, we did have one of the tenants we had to kick out. He died suddenly, and his wife, his second wife, and his son were fighting over the property because they both thought they were entitled to the lease. They weren't really. This was just like a yard space, and the guy used it to store vehicles and do stuff. And I went to go lock up the property because neither of them were entitled to the property. Well, like, I go to lock it up, and about 2 minutes as I'm locking it up, another gentleman shows up and starts confronting me and yelling at me for locking up the property and telling me I have no right. And what was creepy about that whole thing is that they had other locations around us. They were in some really kind of shady stuff. And so somebody was looking out for that property and watching me, and knew when I showed up that they radioed somebody else to come confront me about it. and it was a little weird, and he was very threatening, and it was a very creepy incident because they were trying to use their sort of local authority to say you have no authority here, and I'm like, I represent the landlord who owns this property. Yeah, we have authority because this is a weird place too because they had an old gentleman who lived on the property, which was obviously a no-no. But we found out towards the end that they had this old guy. We always saw him there early in the morning, and then he would kind of disappear at night. But he lived in a little shack on the property, so I don't know what they were keeping in there or what they wanted to protect, but they felt like somebody had to live there to protect what they were doing. So fortunately, they were out, but they were. I would say that was one of the more shady things we've dealt with. Because I'm like, they fortunately by the time we took it over, cleaned everything out, we didn't find anything weird. But it was we didn't know we were going to go in there and find like a body or two. It was one of those just really weird industrial properties. But the guy always
Right.
paid rent on time. The guy was always nice, but something was going on for sure.
The one thing that I've found, because I completely agree with you, the point you made about empty buildings, that is such a big risk. Just put an alarm on it. Anytime you have an empty building, just put an alarm on it, because if nothing else, it'll trigger. Maybe that deters someone from going in there. Maybe you could actually get somebody out there, police or whatever, to deal with it. It's cheap to get an alarm system in there, so do that. But also on the topic of vacant buildings, curious your thoughts on this, because I think it's an occupational hazard walking into dark, empty buildings for a living. You have no
Mhm.
idea who's in there or what's going on in there, and you're the first one there, and sometimes you're the only one there. Is that a worry, a concern? Especially, like, I think of like a guy is going to be a little bit better at protecting himself than a woman, as an example. Do you put anything in place or have any procedures or protocols on when someone is going into an empty building?
Yeah, we want to do a buddy system. If you're going to go into an empty building, do a buddy system, do it in the middle of the day. Don't do it don't go at night, don't do it in early morning. Um it's We'll have two people go. Obviously, let other people know in the office too that you're going, so everyone's aware. And then, fortunately, we don't really have any issues where you walk into a property and you come across a person or something. But it's obviously a very legitimate concern.
Mm.
First is like scope out the outside, just make sure nothing like there's no broken window or something. Make sure all the doors look shut, and then enter the property. And then always leave a door open when you're entering a property at first, just so you have an escape. You can kind of look around. Then when you're fully kind of in and you're going to go deeper into the property, then we lock that door just to make sure that nobody walks in behind you as you're inside the property. So yeah, maybe have the door open while the other person's kind of just doing a quick look around in case something weird, then you guys kind of hightail it out. But if everything kind of looks okay, then lock the door so no one follows you in. So I think because we've had that where we had giant, 25,000 square foot, sort of this quasi-industrial office space, and it's like there were hallways and all sorts of meandering areas, and just even bathrooms. You go there's if there's 4 or 5 stalls lined up in a women's restroom, that's an easy place for someone to hide. So we'll go look around, but we'll try to buddy it up where people aren't on their own, because that's the last thing you want to have to deal with anyone just getting injured that way.
Those are some great tips. I feel like we've covered a ton of ground and given some really good tips that people probably don't think about. Like, it's just not top of mind for a lot of these things. What else haven't we covered that you think is worth covering? Anything that people don't think about enough, or is really important that we should mention, or what have we missed?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just the leases. Those are really, really important to get right. Because a lot you get maybe the landlord has their own lease, which is good. And then those get negotiated and things change. And then the property managers are the ones who are actually responsible for really enforcing that lease. So if we've seen them where one item gets negated, one paragraph says X, the other one says not X, and then you're like, what is, we got to go one way or the other here. So the landlord, you go to the landlord to say, hey, can you make that call on how you kind of want to do this, or do we need to do an amendment to fix it? But one of the biggest things, at least a good property manager, they're going to lease abstract all their leases, and they're going to know them through and through. or at least have some system where they know what they're doing. Because everything that happens at a property, my property manager will come say, hey, what this happened, what I do, and always the first response is, have you looked at the lease? What does the lease say? Because the lease should cover almost everything that's happening. Any problem that's happened at the property is effectively going to be covered by lease. Either is that the landlord's responsibility, is that the tenant's responsibility. One thing that will get missed too is sometimes something is someone's responsibility, but somebody else is actually going to pay the bill. So a lot of times maybe the landlord's responsible for maintaining the roof, but that roof cost can be charged back to the tenant. And so sometimes you have to, as a property manager, you have to really educate tenants on kind of understanding how their lease is understood, because they may say, oh no, the landlord's supposed to do this. Like, yeah, we're supposed to take care of it. We're overseeing it, but you guys through your cams or some sort of maybe direct bill back are actually gonna have to eat that cost. So I think too, especially maybe smaller industrial groups or users, I don't think they also understand that the commercial leases are very they're complex, and there's a lot of responsibility, a financial commitment on the side of the tenant that gets missed at times. We see it a lot in retail, and we also see it a lot when it's like a small industrial space. Maybe they took a 4,000 square foot little place. They don't realize they're on the hook for all the common area charges. They're also responsible for maintaining their HVAC unit. They also may be responsible for replacing that HVAC unit. And now those costs have skyrocketed, where it's easily $9,000 or $10,000 to put a new HVAC unit on a roof. And the lease might say, the tenant, and maybe you've been there for 2 years and you're like, oh crap, I only got 3 years left on my lease. I don't want to buy a whole new HVAC unit for my landlord who's going to have it for 20 years, but that's what your lease says, And so there's just those issues that people run about. And people also, with the smaller groups, the bigger groups usually are very sophisticated, so you don't run into these issues. The smaller ones, is where you see it. And also understanding that a lot of people think, oh, if my business fails, then I can just end my lease and we can part ways. But if you start a business and you're 2 years into your lease term, you realize your business isn't taking for whatever reason, or you're running through financial problems and you have a 5-year lease, you're still responsible for that lease for the next 3 years. And a lot of people miss that. They think, hey, they'll call up, hey, we're struggling right now. We're going to shut down. How do you want to end the lease? How do you want to terminate this? And we're like, we're not terminating anything. The lease still has to go. You can sublease, but you're still on the hook. You have maybe a personal guarantee or something. We're still going to go after you for that lease term. Now, sometimes then you go to the landlord, and the landlord might say, hey, let's accommodate it, or really strong leasing demand. Don't worry, we can get it filled. We'll just have a buyout or something. But it's a lot of times what people think is, oh, if my business isn't doing well, then I can just shut down, give the keys back to the landlord, and we can go our separate ways. And that's really not how it works in commercial. If you sign a 5-year lease, you got to plan to be committed to a 5-year term, whether your business is successful or not.
We're just about at the top of the hour here, and I always shocked at how quick an hour goes. And even something about property management, which we teed it off by saying that a lot of people think it's very straightforward. Well, we just talked about it for an hour, and there's probably much more we still could have talked about. So I loved it. I think you added a ton of great information to myself and others tuned into this. So really do want to thank you for sharing all that great info with us.
Of course. Hey, thank you for having me. This is great. If you want to keep talking property management another time, let me know. I'm always happy to discuss it. So there's a lot to cover.
Yeah, I'd love to. Like it'd be awesome in a future call to even do a deeper dive into it. So yeah, I will take you up on that to do another episode. And then in the meantime, I'll put in the show notes your website, Valley Advisory and Management, a link to that website, and then LinkedIn as well. Anywhere else that people can reach out to you if they want to chat with you?
Yeah, I am on Twitter. If they want to, it's at Capital for Value. And I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, yeah, and the website. And then if you want to put my email on there too, it's charlie@vamcre.com, VAMCRE.com. So put that out there too.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. And Charlie, specifically, thanks again for your time, and look forward to continuing to chat.